Political Crisis on Instagram Through the Lens of the Apologia Theory, a research study done by Julia Heymann and Amelia Walters for Sacred Heart University. Crisis communication is an important area in today's world. How one responds to a crisis determines one's fate. In 2021, everything is permanent. Nothing can remain hidden. With that in mind, does it pay to be transparent? What are the pros and cons of transparency as determined by millennials? How do millennials perceive the prevalence of constructs from the apologia theory on communication about personal character-related crisis uncovered through social media, as well as their feelings on how crises become aggravated? The public can respond immediately through social media platforms, meaning companies are always on display. The public is shown negative news during a crisis, and what is seen on social media impacts what sides are taken. The apologia theory suggests anticipative strategies for possible accusations to gain positive attribution. Crisis has become an everyday occurrence in the world. Political crisis communication research deals with communication about political crises such as political upheavals, protests, and subversions of governments and presidents. More research in crisis communication has grown in public relations research, in which the focus is on how to understand the emotions of the public. In 2021, it is difficult to form an independent opinion before the whole story is released. Social media opened an entirely new world to crisis communication. Millennials either form their own opinions or form their opinions based on what they are hearing and seeing on social media. With social media, individuals are able to partake in the conversation and potentially have their voices be heard. In the age of social media and information being available instantly, transparency is essential. Transparency in relation to politics is not only expected but demanded. Lack of transparency can lead to crisis or lack of trust. Millennials are constantly on social media waiting for information to drop. They scour social media platforms and are just waiting to cancel someone or for someone to make the wrong move. They spend hours and hours trying to be as informed as possible. It is demanded of any political figure to be transparent, and if they are not, they can face cancellation by anyone on social media. Cancellation can lead to severe crisis that is incredibly hard to come back from. Cancellation is just a modern term for a severe crisis that can completely destroy a political figure. Millennials process information very differently than the generations that came before them. The study was set out to find out how millennials perceive communication about politically motivated crisis on Instagram from news and government entities, as well as how millennials perceive the prevalence of constructs from the apologia theory from communication about politically motivated crisis on Instagram from news and government entities. The research will find if this age group takes notice of political crises on social media and transparency. Do millennials think that there is too much information available in a political crisis, or does this group need to know everything? The apologia theory is considered one of the original strategies of crisis communication. This literature review will analyze articles spanning over 30 years of research on this particular theory and discuss how it relates to communication and crisis communication. The apologia theory consists of multiple different strategies. These strategies include denial, bolstering, differentiation, and transcendence. The denial strategy is the idea of shifting the blame to someone or something else, or claiming no involvement whatsoever. For example, Bill Clinton, I did not have sexual relations with that woman. The bolstering strategy is when attention is shifted or diverted to the good deeds of the guilty party. Frequently, this is thought of as trying to evade taking responsibility or lessening offensiveness. Then there is the differentiation strategy when the action is shifted or taken away from the negative context. Furthermore, finally, the transcendence strategy lowers the offensive or harmful nature of the event by explaining it in a way that makes it seem as if it was the lesser of two evils. Throughout the research, multiple authors have come up with the similar conclusion. Apologia theory on its own is not effective, but often when paired with another strategy, it can be more successful. According to Art, their analysis found that corrective action is the most successful and third most common strategy, particularly when paired with another strategy, such as reducing the offensiveness or bolstering. It seems that the bolstering is seen as the most effective apologia strategy because it aims to shift blame or make the audience feel sympathy instead of anger or confusion. It would appear to be the most effective strategy. Bolstering strategy results in much higher sympathy for both actors and reduces the public's punitive responses against the actors, although it is not likely to completely remove the public anger. While the most successful bolstering does not succeed in completely taking the accused party out of hot water, it may garner some sympathy, however. The apologia theory has heavily influenced crisis communications. While much of current crisis communication strategies have moved on from this theory, much is still rooted within this strategy. In order to develop more potent forms of crisis communications, one must fully understand where crisis communication started. Our first research question was, how do millennials perceive communication about politically motivated crisis on Instagram from news and government entities? Question 2, how do millennials perceive the prevalence of constructs from the apologia theory from communication about politically motivated crises on Instagram from news and government entities? Our research focused on crisis communications as a relevant subject in understanding the world as it stands today. With social media being an essential factor in the lives of millennials, especially when it comes to news and politics, it is understandable that crisis often plays out in these platforms. The study research is formed based on the use of both qualitative and quantitative research methods to investigate social media's impact on political crises through the lens of apologia theory. This task was accomplished with 4 structured interviews using the grounded theory approach and 20 surveys given to social media users. For our research, we use qualitative and quantitative data. Through qualitative research methods like interviews, the goal is to get a personal take on the research questions in a less broad context. Personalizing the approach makes the research more valuable. How best to explore and represent the lived experience of others is a central question in qualitative research. Quantitative data in the form of survey collection can provide a rich source of data for generating theory. Quantitative research regards the world as being outside of themselves and an objective reality. By collecting both of these data, there are 2 forms of data, which gives more clarification and more efficiency.
Results. The results, while intriguing, being the age of millennials, make these findings somewhat unsurprising. However, it is incredibly exciting to have them documented and confirmed in this way. While people had interesting perspectives, their thoughts on how social media platforms like Instagram affect a political crisis are similar and prove a point discussed in the following sections. Major themes that emerged out of research question 1 are transparency, political crises on social media, and apologies. Expressed in the interview portion and then majorly reconfirmed in the survey, transparency is one of the most important things to millennials when it comes to political crises, especially on social media. 100% of survey participants agree that transparency in media and politics is incredibly important. And while all survey participants agree that it is important, only about 40% believe that someone can be fully transparent, 15% say no, someone cannot be fully transparent, and 45% are not sure. Emerging themes for research question 2 are ownership and accountability, strategy, and apologies. As you may have noticed, apologies are themes for both research question 1 and research question 2. Apologies, also going with our apologia theory, is incredibly important when it comes to the political crisis. The apologia theory is made up of multiple different strategies. When asked during the survey which strategy they thought would be the most effective, 45% said none of the above, concluding and agreeing with the interview participants that the apologia theory seems to be outdated and not effective on social media, especially when it comes to millennials. Millennials never believe that one should hide their actions. However, something they can agree on is that they can put their own actions into a positive light. Not everything has to be negative. Instead of denying, you must own up to your actions and explain the behavior or statement in a positive light. 60% of millennials polled agree with this. Through the results of the survey responses and interviews, we have uncovered quite a bit of information. One of the most exciting pieces of information to come out of the research has to do with transparency. 100% of millennials polled believe in the importance of transparency, yet when only 45% of those polled believe maybe someone can be fully transparent, you would think that millennials would put effort into seeking the truth. However, our research disagrees with this. When asked if when there is a politically motivated crisis on Instagram from news and government sources and the characters at play are said to be quote-unquote fully transparent, how likely are they to fact-check what these figures are saying? Only 40% said they would fact-check the information. 45% said they would take the information at face value, and 15% said they were unsure what they would do in this situation. Why this is important is because millennials are a generation that demands honesty from those in power. They want complete transparency, yet the evidence shows that they will not necessarily put in the work to ensure what they are told is the truth. For a generation that is well informed on many issues and is constantly on social media, it is surprising that they do not put more effort into making sure they know the truth. The implications of our research are as such. Findings of research offer a new look at millennials and social media. Instagram is not a new platform, yet there seems to be more research done on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. People should really take into account the importance of Instagram to millennials. More research should be done on the value and differences of Instagram and how that impacts political crises. Due to millennials obviously valuing transparency, it is important that more research is done on the value of adding that into political strategy, but also the strategy for crisis communications, preemptive and post-crises. Social media should be viewed as an extension of a person. What someone says and does on social media is important. Transparency online is demanded, and more political figures need to understand that. Taking into account transparency and the call for ownership of one's own actions would be important and a great way to preempt political crises or crises at all on social media, or to minimize or mitigate the impact of a crisis on one's own reputation. While the interviews and surveys provided many answers, they also led to even bigger questions. This topic needs a larger pool of both interviewees and survey participants. The interviews and surveys both need more multiple choice sections, moreover asking questions with more scenario choices to get a better perspective on one's own political views and social media usage, and how one would react given a crisis. Also, asking questions about people's personal views on politics and social media would be incredibly fruitful to this research. Further pursuing a mixed methodology approach would be the most beneficial in this case. In conclusion, millennials perceive communication about politically motivated crises on Instagram from news and government entities dependent on how someone handles a crisis. If a person is willing to accept responsibility and own their actions, millennials will look at a crisis much differently than if someone went to deny their involvement. Millennials demand transparency and appreciate accountability. They feel social media is not a place for lies and deceit, especially during political crises. While cancel culture is toxic, it is important that people tell the truth and hold themselves accountable.